The cruelest jokes are the ones played on people who never agreed to be part of them. On a cool Friday evening in downtown Seattle, Emily Brooks checked the time on her phone for the third time in less than a minute and wondered why she had said yes. The restaurant was far nicer than the places she usually visited, the kind with soft lighting, polished wood tables, and a menu where every item seemed to cost more than a week of groceries for a small family. As a single mother raising her 8-year-old son, she rarely spent money on herself, and she definitely did not spend evenings meeting strangers. But her coworkers had insisted. They told her she deserved one night away from responsibilities. They promised this would be fun. Looking around the private dining area they had reserved, Emily began to suspect their definition of fun was very different from hers. At a table near the back, a group of people she recognized from work exchanged glances and tried not to laugh. One woman nudged another. A man raised his phone as if sending a message. Then several of them looked toward the entrance at the exact same moment. Emily followed their gaze. A tall man had just walked inside. He wore a simple navy jacket, faded jeans, and a plain white button-down shirt. Nothing about him stood out in a city filled with successful professionals. His hair was neatly trimmed, and his expression carried a quiet confidence. But there was no flashy watch, no expensive-looking accessories, no attempt to impress anyone. He looked like an ordinary man arriving after a long workday. The moment he approached the table, a few people struggled to hide their smiles. Emily noticed it immediately. Something felt wrong. The man introduced himself politely. Ethan Carter. Emily shook his hand. Emily Brooks. Before either of them could say much more, one of her coworkers loudly announced that they were the perfect match, causing several others to chuckle. Ethan offered a small smile, but did not react. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had expected awkwardness. She had not expected an audience. Throughout the next several minutes, the strange behavior continued. Phones buzzed. People exchanged knowing looks. Someone nearly laughed out loud before pretending to cough. The more Emily watched, the more uncomfortable she became. Ethan seemed to notice it too, though he remained calm. He thanked the server, asked thoughtful questions, and listened carefully whenever Emily spoke. There was something unexpectedly genuine about him. Yet the atmosphere around them grew stranger by the minute. Then, while a group at the neighboring table tried and failed to suppress another round of amusement, Emily finally caught sight of a message lighting up one coworker's phone screen. She could only read a few words before the screen disappeared, but it was enough. The message read, "How long before she leaves?" Beneath it were dollar amounts, small bets, predictions, laughter. Suddenly everything made sense. This wasn't a blind date. It was a game. And somehow, both she and the quiet stranger sitting across from her had become the punchline. Emily kept her eyes on the table for several seconds after seeing the message. She wished she could convince herself she had misunderstood it, but the laughter around the room made that impossible. Someone had organized this. Someone had turned two unsuspecting people into entertainment. Across from her, Ethan calmly folded his menu and thanked the server when a glass of water was placed in front of him. If he knew what was happening, he hid it remarkably well. Emily studied him carefully. There was no sign of embarrassment on his face, but there was something else. A quiet patience. The kind people developed after years of dealing with situations they could not control. At the neighboring table, one of her coworkers glanced over and whispered something that triggered another round of muffled laughter. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Normally, she avoided confrontation. Life as a single mother had taught her to save her energy for battles that mattered. But tonight felt different. "I owe you an apology," she said softly. Ethan looked up. "For what?" "For whatever this is." A faint smile appeared on his face. "You did not create it." "No, but apparently I was invited to participate in it." Ethan leaned back slightly. "Then we have that in common." The answer surprised her. There was no bitterness in his voice. No self-pity. Just a simple statement of fact. The server returned to take their orders, and for a few minutes the room settled down. Emily noticed that Ethan treated everyone with the same level of respect. He made eye contact. He listened. He never acted rushed. It was a small thing, but she found it refreshing. Too many people spent conversations waiting for their turn to speak. Ethan actually seemed interested in what others had to say. Meanwhile, the group behind them continued their private game. One man walked past their table and casually dropped a $20 bill onto another coworker's chair before returning to his seat. The gesture was subtle, but not subtle enough. Emily realized the betting was still happening. They were actively tracking the date, measuring it, predicting when one of them would walk away. She felt a wave of frustration, not because they were laughing at her, but because they seemed determined to reduce another human being to a joke. She glanced back at Ethan. The strange thing was that he did not fit the role they had assigned him. He was not awkward. He was not rude. He was not desperate. If anything, he seemed more comfortable in his own skin than anyone else in the room. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why did you agree to come tonight?" Ethan looked toward the restaurant window, where city lights reflected against the dark evening sky. For a moment, he seemed to consider several answers before choosing one. "Because sometimes the people who arrange things for you think they know what you need." Emily laughed quietly. "That sounds familiar. Did they pressure you to?" "For 3 straight weeks." Ethan smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him all evening, and somehow it changed the atmosphere between them. For the first time since arriving, Emily stopped feeling like a participant in someone else's joke and started feeling like she was having a real conversation with a real person. Unfortunately for the people placing bets across the room, neither of them seemed ready to leave. As the evening continued, Emily noticed something unexpected. The laughter from the other tables had not disappeared, but it had started to lose its effect. The longer she spoke with Ethan, the harder it became to see him through the lens everyone else had created. He was thoughtful without trying to impress her. He listened without interrupting. When she mentioned her son, he did not offer empty sympathy or rehearsed compliments. He simply asked questions that showed genuine interest. That alone set him apart from most people she had met in years. Their meals arrived, and for a while the noise around them faded into the background. Yet every now and then Emily would catch another glance, another smirk, another whispered comment from the people who had arranged this entire situation. The reminder sat in the back of her mind like a pebble in a shoe. Small, but impossible to ignore. Eventually, she set down her fork and looked directly at Ethan. There was something she needed to know. Something that had bothered her from the moment she saw that message on the phone screen. Ethan noticed the change in her expression. His relaxed smile faded slightly. "What is it?" he asked. Emily hesitated. She was not normally the kind of person who asked difficult questions. Life had taught her to avoid unnecessary conflict. But she also believed honesty mattered, especially when trust was involved. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask me anything." She took a slow breath. "Were you in on it?" For the first time all evening, complete silence settled between them. The sounds of conversation around the restaurant seemed distant. Ethan did not look confused. He knew exactly what she meant. His eyes moved briefly toward the group behind them before returning to hers. Emily watched carefully. She had spent years reading people, working long shifts, raising a child, managing responsibilities alone. Experience had taught her that the truth often appeared before words did. Ethan could have laughed. He could have acted offended. He could have dodged the question entirely. Instead, he answered immediately. No, just one word. No hesitation. No defensiveness. No performance. Emily continued, watching him. "You had no idea this was happening?" "Not until I arrived." "And you stayed anyway?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "So did you." Emily could not help smiling back. "That is fair." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "For what it is worth, I do not enjoy being the subject of jokes any more than you do." There was something sincere in the way he said it. Not anger, not resentment, just honesty. Emily felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The answer explained several things. It explained why he seemed detached from the awkward atmosphere. It explained why he never reacted to the comments. Most importantly, it explained why she had sensed no arrogance in him. He was dealing with the same situation she was. "I am glad I asked," she said quietly. "So am I," Ethan replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then something unusual happened. The joke that had brought them together suddenly felt less important than the conversation itself. And across the room, several disappointed spectators began realizing that the evening was not unfolding according to their plan. The atmosphere between them changed after that question. The uncertainty that had hovered over the table all evening seemed to dissolve, replaced by something far more comfortable. Emily found herself relaxing for the first time since she had arrived. She was no longer trying to figure out whether Ethan was part of the joke. Now she was simply getting to know him. The conversation drifted naturally from one topic to another. Ethan asked about her son, and Emily spoke about 8-year-old Noah with the kind of pride only a parent could understand. She told him about science projects taking over the kitchen table, weekend soccer games played in the rain, and the endless collection of sneakers that somehow appeared too small every few months. Ethan listened with genuine interest. He laughed at the right moments and asked questions that made it clear he was paying attention. "Sounds like he keeps you busy," Ethan said. "Busy is one word for it," Emily replied with a smile. "Exhausted is another." Ethan laughed softly. "I imagine both can be true. Most days they are." For a moment, Emily studied him. "What about you? Do you have children?" Ethan shook his head. No, there was no sadness in the answer, but there was a hint of reflection, as if it was a subject he had considered many times before. "Then you probably sleep a lot more than I do." "I would not bet on that," he said. The response made her laugh again. It surprised her how easy this felt. Most first dates felt like interviews. Two strangers presenting polished versions of themselves. This felt different. Ethan never seemed interested in impressing her. In fact, he rarely talked about himself unless she asked directly. Even then, his answers were simple. He mentioned that work kept him busy. He traveled occasionally. He preferred quiet evenings over large social events. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing designed to attract attention. Yet somehow Emily found him more interesting than people who spend hours talking about their accomplishments. As the conversation continued, she noticed small details. When a server accidentally brought the wrong side dish, Ethan thanked him anyway and politely asked for a replacement. When a nearby customer dropped a napkin, Ethan picked it up without making a show of it. Little things. Easy things to overlook. But Emily had learned that character often revealed itself through small moments. Across the room, the betting crowd seemed increasingly confused. Their entertainment was not unfolding as expected. Instead of leaving, Emily and Ethan appeared more engaged with each passing minute. A few people checked their phones. Others exchanged frustrated looks. Emily almost found it amusing now. They had expected disaster. They had expected awkward silence. They had expected someone to storm out. Instead, they were watching two people enjoy an honest conversation. "Can I tell you something?" Ethan asked. "Of course. When I walked in tonight, I almost turned around and left." Emily blinked. "Really?" He nodded. Something felt off immediately. "I had the same feeling." Ethan smiled. "I am glad neither of us listened to it." Emily looked at him for a moment. Neither was she. Because somewhere between the laughter, the whispers, and the ridiculous bets, the evening had quietly become something nobody in that room had expected. The evening should have ended by then, but neither Emily nor Ethan seemed eager to leave. Dessert menus arrived, and to Emily's surprise, they both agreed to stay a little longer. The strange part was that she had completely forgotten why she had been reluctant to come in the first place. The laughter from the other tables still surfaced occasionally, but it felt distant now, like background noise from another conversation. As Ethan spoke about travel, books, and the places he hoped to visit someday, Emily noticed something she had missed earlier. Every few minutes, someone seemed to recognize him. Not in the obvious way celebrities were recognized, but in a quieter, more curious manner. A man in a business suit walked past their table and briefly nodded at Ethan. Ethan returned the nod politely before continuing the conversation as if nothing had happened. A few minutes later, a woman near the bar appeared to do a double take before whispering something to the person beside her. Again, Ethan ignored it completely. Emily found herself wondering why. "Do people know you?" she asked suddenly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That is an interesting question. That is not a no." He laughed softly. "I suppose it depends on the person." The answer was careful. Not evasive exactly, but careful. Emily filed it away. As the server arrived with dessert, something else caught her attention. The young employee greeted Ethan by name before immediately looking surprised. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," he said. Then his eyes widened slightly as if he realized he had revealed something he should not have. Ethan simply smiled. "Good evening." The employee quickly excused himself and hurried away. Emily stared at Ethan. "You come here often?" "Not very often." "Then how did he know your name?" Ethan took a sip of water. "I have been here before." "That does not explain much." "No," he admitted, smiling again. The answer only increased her curiosity. Throughout the evening she had assumed Ethan lived an ordinary life. Yet little details kept refusing to fit that picture. His clothes were simple, but perfectly tailored. His manners were effortless. People seemed unusually respectful around him. Even the manager had walked by twice, offering greetings that felt warmer than standard customer service. None of it proved anything. Still, Emily had developed strong instincts over the years, and those instincts were quietly telling her that there was more to Ethan's story than he was sharing. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen for less than a second before placing it face down on the table. Emily only caught a brief glimpse, but it was enough to notice several messages waiting beneath a calendar filled with meetings. Whatever he did for a living, it appeared important. "Busy night?" she asked. "Unfortunately." "Work emergency?" "Not exactly." He hesitated. "People asking questions that can wait until tomorrow." Emily smiled. "You must have a lot of responsibility." Ethan looked at her for a moment before answering. "More than I expected when I was younger." It was an honest answer, but somehow it raised even more questions. And for the first time all evening, Emily began to suspect that the quiet man sitting across from her was hiding something much bigger than either of them had planned to discuss tonight. The restaurant had begun to empty by the time Emily glanced at the clock. Nearly 3 hours had passed, yet the conversation never felt forced. That alone was unusual. Most people spent their time talking about what they had accomplished. Ethan seemed more interested in understanding other people. The more questions he asked, the more Emily found herself sharing things she rarely discussed outside her closest circle. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "You have been asking questions all night." Emily replied with a smile. "One more will not hurt." Ethan smiled back. "Earlier you mentioned that you work at the clinic. Is that what you always wanted to do?" The question should have been simple, but it caught her off guard. For a moment she stared at the table. Very few people ever asked about the dreams that came before reality. Most only saw the life she lived now. A single mother working long hours, balancing bills, school schedules, and responsibilities. They rarely wondered what had existed before all of that. "No," she said quietly. Ethan waited. He never rushed people when they were choosing their words. "What did you want to do?" Emily exhaled slowly. "Law school." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. "Really?" She nodded. "I was accepted into one of the best programs in the state." "What happened?" Emily gave a small laugh, though there was sadness behind it. "Life happened." For the first time that evening, she told the story. She spoke about the years she spent studying, the scholarships she earned, the professors who believed she would have a successful legal career. Then she told him about becoming a mother far sooner than expected, about difficult choices, about priorities changing overnight, about deciding that a little boy needed stability more than she needed ambition. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked carefully. Emily thought about the question. She thought about Noah's smile, his soccer games, his endless curiosity, his habit of leaving half-finished science experiments all over their apartment. "Never him," she said. "Not for a second." Ethan nodded. "But sometimes I wonder who I would have become." The admission lingered between them. Ethan looked at her with a level of understanding that surprised her. Not pity, not sympathy, understanding. "I think everyone wonders that sometimes," he said. "Even people who appear successful." Emily studied him. Something in the way he said it felt personal, as though he was speaking from experience. "You sound like someone who gave something up too." For a brief moment, Ethan looked toward the window. The reflection of city lights danced across the glass. "More than once," he admitted. The answer was quiet, but sincere. Emily found herself unexpectedly relieved. So many people viewed life as a straight path. Success, achievement, recognition. Yet sitting across from her was someone who seemed to understand sacrifice. Someone who understood that every choice came with another path left unexplored. Across the room, a few of the remaining spectators still watched from a distance, clearly confused by what they were seeing. They had expected embarrassment. Instead, they were witnessing two strangers discussing the most important decisions of their lives. And as Ethan listened to her story with complete attention, Emily realized something she had not expected when she walked into the restaurant. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. Emily was still thinking about their conversation when an unexpected commotion near the entrance drew attention from several remaining guests. It was not loud, but it was noticeable. Two men in business attire had entered the restaurant and were speaking with the manager. One of them appeared concerned. The other kept glancing around the room as though searching for someone. Ethan noticed them immediately. For the first time all evening, his expression changed. It was subtle, but Emily caught it. The relaxed ease disappeared, replaced by the look of someone who had just remembered an unfinished responsibility. Everything okay? She asked. Ethan gave a small nod. Probably. The answer sounded less certain than his previous ones. A minute later, one of the men spotted Ethan and headed directly toward their table. Emily expected a friend or colleague. Instead, the man stopped a respectful distance away. "Mr. Carter," he said. "I apologize for interrupting." Emily froze. The name itself was not surprising. The tone was. It was the kind of tone employees used when addressing someone important. Ethan looked mildly annoyed. "I thought I asked everyone not to contact me tonight." "Normally we would not," the man replied. "But the board meeting schedule changed, and several directors are requesting confirmation before tomorrow morning." Ethan sighed quietly. "It can wait until tomorrow." "Understood, sir." "Sir." The word lingered in Emily's mind long after the man stepped away. Across the room, something else happened. One of the co-workers who had been participating in the betting game suddenly stood up so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over. She stared at Ethan as if she had seen a ghost. Within seconds, she was showing something on her phone to the others. Their reactions spread from table to table. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. Emily watched the chain reaction unfold, without understanding it. Then she noticed a photograph on one of the phone screens. The image showed Ethan standing on a stage beside a company logo she recognized immediately. Her heart skipped. She knew that company. Everyone did. It was one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. The founder appeared regularly in business magazines and financial news articles. Emily slowly turned toward Ethan. "Wait." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, as if he knew exactly what was coming next. "Emily, you are Ethan Carter?" He gave a reluctant smile. "Yes." Her mind raced. Suddenly, every strange detail from the evening connected together. The employees who knew his name. The respectful greetings. The constant messages. The people recognizing him. The quiet confidence. None of it had been random. "The Ethan Carter?" she asked. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I suppose that depends on which one you mean." Emily laughed despite herself. "The billionaire CEO." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around the restaurant, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The same people who had spent hours mocking him were now staring in stunned silence. Ethan, however, seemed far less interested in their reaction than in hers. "I did not mention it because I wanted a normal conversation," he said quietly. "And honestly, I was enjoying having one." Looking into his eyes, Emily realized something important. The biggest surprise was not that he was extraordinarily successful. The biggest surprise was that nothing about the man sitting across from her had changed. He was exactly the same person he had been 5 minutes earlier. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else suddenly thought of him. The shift in the room was impossible to miss. Just minutes earlier, the people who had organized the evening had treated Ethan like a source of entertainment. Now they could barely stop staring. Emily watched as several of her co-workers suddenly became interested in introducing themselves again, as if the last 3 hours had happened differently than she remembered. One man who had spent most of the evening laughing from across the room approached their table wearing an awkward smile. "Ethan, right?" he said. "I cannot believe we did not recognize you." Ethan remained polite. "That happens sometimes." The man laughed nervously. "You should have told us who you were." Emily felt irritation rise immediately. The comment seemed completely backward. Nobody had cared who Ethan was until they discovered his bank account. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. "Why would he need to tell anyone?" The man blinked. "Well, I just mean, you already decided who he was before learning anything about him." Silence followed. A few nearby conversations stopped altogether. The man shifted uncomfortably. "That is not what I meant." "It is exactly what happened," Emily replied. She was not angry for herself anymore. She was angry because she had spent the evening watching people judge someone they had never bothered to know. The fact that Ethan happened to be successful only exposed their behavior. Ethan glanced at her with a surprised expression but remained silent. The man eventually mumbled an excuse and retreated toward his group. Across the room, others quickly lost interest in approaching the table. Emily exhaled and shook her head. "Sorry." "For what?" Ethan asked. "Getting involved." A small smile appeared on his face. "I think you were defending a principle, not a person." Emily considered that. He was probably right. The truth was that the revelation about Ethan's wealth had changed almost nothing for her. She was surprised, certainly. But the version of Ethan she respected had appeared long before she knew anything about his company or his fortune. She respected the man who listened when she talked about Noah, the man who treated restaurant staff with kindness, the man who answered difficult questions honestly. That was the person sitting across from her now. "Can I be honest?" she asked. "Please." "When I found out who you were, I was shocked." Ethan laughed softly. Reasonable reaction. "But then I realized something." "What is that?" Emily looked directly at him. "The only people acting differently are everyone else." For a moment Ethan said nothing. Then he smiled in a way she had not seen before. It was not polite. It was not careful. It was genuine. Almost relieved. "You have no idea how rare it is to hear someone say that." The noise in the restaurant continued around them, but neither paid much attention anymore. The spectators had lost control of the story they thought they were creating. Instead of embarrassment, they had revealed their own assumptions. And sitting together at the center of it all, Emily and Ethan found themselves sharing something far more valuable than anyone in that room had expected: mutual respect. Eventually, the restaurant staff began stacking chairs in distant corners, a quiet reminder that the night could not last forever. Emily glanced at the time and immediately sat up straighter. "Oh no." Ethan smiled. "What happened?" "I promised Noah I would be home before he woke up and checked the clock." Ethan laughed. "That sounds serious." "It is. My son treats promises like legally binding contracts." They both smiled, but as the moment passed, Emily felt something unexpected. Disappointment. She had arrived expecting an awkward evening she would never think about again. Instead, she was preparing to say goodbye to someone she genuinely wanted to know better. Ethan seemed to sense it too. The easy conversation slowed, not because they had run out of things to say, but because neither wanted to be the first person to end it. Finally, Emily gathered her purse. "I should go." Ethan nodded. "I understand." They walked toward the entrance together. Most of the people who had organized the evening were already gone. The few who remained avoided eye contact. Their joke had failed in the most unexpected way possible. Outside, the Seattle air felt cool and crisp. City lights reflected across the sidewalks while distant traffic moved through the streets. For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Ethan spoke. "There is something I should tell you." Emily looked up. "Okay." Ethan hesitated, which immediately caught her attention. It was the first time all evening he seemed uncertain. "Before tonight, I knew your name." Emily blinked. "What?" "Not personally." He shook his head. "But I knew who you were." Confusion crossed her face. "How?" Ethan smiled. "Slightly. My company sponsors several community programs. A few years ago, I started reviewing stories connected to local volunteer projects." Emily listened carefully. One report mentioned a single mother who spent weekends organizing school supply drives while working full-time and raising a child. Realization slowly appeared in her eyes. "That was years ago." "I know. You remember that?" Ethan nodded. "Because most people talk about helping others. You actually did it." Emily stood silent. Out of everything she had learned that night, this surprised her the most. Not the company, not the money, not the success. The fact that someone had quietly noticed the things she did when nobody was watching. "You admired me?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "Long before tonight." For a moment neither spoke. Then Emily laughed, partly from disbelief and partly because the entire evening felt impossible. A date arranged as a joke had become something neither of them expected. "Well," she said finally, "that might be the strangest thing that happened all night. I am fairly certain we have strong competition for that title." Ethan replied. They both laughed. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and handed her a card. "No pressure. No expectations. But if you would ever like to continue our conversation, I would be very happy to hear from you." Emily looked at the card and then back at him. "I think I would like that." As she walked toward her car, she realized the most valuable thing she was taking home was not a connection to a billionaire. It was the rare feeling of being understood. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt a little brighter than it had that morning.